You know what I've realized lately? Sooner or later, you have to pay for past actions, and this can happen at the most unexpected moment. There will always be people who hold a grudge against you for years, and you won't know when to expect a blow. When people are deeply offended and want to take revenge on their abuser, they see no boundaries and can do anything to achieve their goal. My story perfectly illustrates this. My wife, Grace, and I had just finished our intimate evening. Lying next to her, I felt incredibly happy and relaxed. The room was quiet, and Grace was softly snoring on her side. I reached out to turn off the lamp, ready to finally fall asleep. But at that moment, my phone unexpectedly fell to the floor. As I bent down to pick it up, my eyes caught sight of something under the bed. I turned on my phone's flashlight and discovered a condom wrapper. My heart raced. Grace and I didn't use condoms, she was on birth control pills, and we weren't planning on having children, nor did we need condoms since we didn't have any diseases. So, where did this wrapper come from? Damn, I muttered to myself. My heart froze with horror and confusion. I decided to put the wrapper back in its place and went back to bed. I couldn't come to terms with the thought that my wife, my love, could betray me. The next morning, I woke up and tried to act as usual. Breakfast with my wife was filled with mundane conversations, but deep down, I felt unbearable pain and confusion. When I returned home after work, the evening went as usual. We had dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed. But when Grace fell asleep, I quietly got up and checked under the bed. The wrapper was gone. It confirmed my worst fears. I lay in bed, thinking about what to do next. My name is Gregory Alvarado. I am an engineer by training and work in this field. I have always had enough money and never denied myself anything. I met Grace when she was working as a waitress in a cafe I often liked to visit. We didn't start dating right away, it began with light flirting. Eventually, I decided to ask her out on a date, and after a year and a half, I proposed to her. Grace stopped working and began to focus on herself, practicing spiritual practices, meditation, and the like. Eventually, she started making good money from it. She gathered around her paying women who were tired of routine and in poor mental health. With the help of spiritual practices, she helped them find themselves again. She also regularly maintained her physical shape, counted her calories, and visited the gym. I restricted her in only one way: men were not allowed in her circle. I was categorically against it, and initially, Grace listened to me and focused exclusively on women. However, as her social media following grew, she became more recognizable, even among male audiences. To not violate my requirements, she introduced a separate course for men, conducting it through electronic communication. I wasn't against this, although I was skeptical. Thus, Grace held classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays for women and on Saturdays for men. Later, Grace expressed her desire to open enrollment for a separate men's group as there was a lot of interest and she could earn more if the classes were held offline. I didn't like this, but Grace and I found a compromise. She suggested I attend her classes disguised as a regular man on Saturdays. To put it mildly, I was against this, but Grace challenged me, and seeing how much she enjoyed it, I decided to let it be and supported her idea. The first few classes went well. I wasn't a fan of all this spiritual stuff, but for the sake of my own peace and to support my wife, I decided to sacrifice my sleep on Saturdays. After a few months of attending, I realized there was nothing to worry about. The classes were attended by mature, successful men, all of whom were married. Within a couple of months, I got to know each of the 10 regular attendees. As a result, I decided there was no longer any reason for me to attend the classes and stopped fully trusting my wife. After all, it's her job, which she enjoys, and I didn't want to be that controlling husband. Exactly 6 months after I stopped attending the classes, I now lie in bed trying to figure out if there's a connection between my wife's classes and the condoms found under our bed. I realized the next few weeks would be very interesting. The next day, I contacted an acquaintance named Steve, whom I had met at a drunken party and with whom I've occasionally kept in touch. Steve was knowledgeable about computers, so I asked him where I could buy surveillance equipment, including video cameras and listening devices. All this cost me a couple of $1,000, but I was convinced it was worth it. While Grace was at the hall, I came home and installed cameras with a recording device. It was important for me to understand whether my wife was cheating on me or if the condoms were just a coincidence. When Grace returned, I went out to her car and installed a listening device right in the cabin, then returned to the house. As we sat down to eat, I decided to have a chat with Grace. "How was your day? How's work?" I asked. "Great, tomorrow I'll be leading a group of men," she said. "Oh, cool, I'd like to go too," I blurted out unexpectedly, wanting to see her reaction. "Yeah, no problem, we'll go at 9 o'clock in the morning as usual," she said, without a hint of doubt. I thought to myself, damn, I didn't want to go. The next day, Grace woke me up, and I went with her to the training. In my head, I even managed to justify the trip. I wanted to see how the group of men had changed and how many new faces there would be. To my surprise, more than half were people I had not seen before, which made my task more complicated. After the usual training session, this time I introduced myself to the newcomers as Grace's husband and mentioned that I also occasionally attend her sessions. I didn't catch any suspicious looks, and overall, it seemed quite normal. We went home and spent the rest of the day there. Grace acted as usual, and I tried not to arouse any suspicions, though I was uncomfortable. The condom wrapper kept bothering me. Over the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. There were no signs or hints of infidelity. Nothing happened in our home while I was at work, and Grace didn't drive anyone in her car or say anything suspicious. I felt like I was wrongfully accusing my wife and needed to stop spying on her. Until I stumbled upon an interesting conversation. As usual, I waited for Grace to fall asleep, went down to the living room, and opened my laptop to review all the recordings. It took me about 2 hours, sometimes even more. While the surveillance cameras were easy to review, the listening device in the car was problematic. However, at one point, I stumbled upon an interesting conversation my wife had with a man. Their conversation was quite short. She was driving somewhere and suddenly picked up the phone and said, "I'll be at your place in a couple of minutes. I'm already approaching the plaza." The plaza was a hotel located 10 minutes drive from the sports hall where Grace usually trained, and this was my first major clue. I wanted to find out information from the hotel whether any rooms were booked under my wife's name, but I wouldn't be given access to such data just like that. So I contacted my friend Steve again, who explained that I had 2 options, both illegal: either hack into the hotel system to get all the guest data or pay money to the administrator for access to all the information. The second option was more appealing to me, so I decided to start with it. On Monday, when my wife had a day off and was at the gym, I decided to visit the hotel to get more details. The administrator turned out to be a young woman, apparently a student. At first, I offered her $500 for the information on all the hotel's clients for the past month, but she threatened to call the police and insisted that I leave the hotel as soon as possible. However, I persisted, and eventually, the administrator called the hotel owner. He invited me to a cafe. He was an adult man with a beard, around 40 to 45 years old. The administrator told him that I was trying to illegally obtain personal information about the guests. Donald, the owner's name, said he would handle it. We sat down in the cafe, and he began to inquire why I needed such valuable information. Before I could answer, he directly asked, "Do you suspect your wife of cheating?" "Yes, how did you figure that out?" I asked. "Do you think you're the only one who has come to the hotel wanting information about the clients? 80% of our regular guests are lovers who rent rooms for a day, spend just a couple of hours, and then leave. Plus, our prices are democratic, attracting lovers," he explained. I told him that for 2 weeks I had been watching my wife through hidden cameras and listening devices, but it gave me nothing except a lead on the hotel. "All right, I'll help you, but first, you need to give me a photo of your wife and the days she's often not at home and you can't monitor her," he said. After a few seconds, he added, "Also, I need you to cover the potential lost profits for half a year, but we'll calculate that when we catch your wife." Talk about a businessman, I thought to myself, and agreed to his terms. I provided him with the days my wife was often away from home, Tuesday and Thursday, because according to her, those were her busiest days. I also gave him a photo of Grace. Donald and I said goodbye, and he promised to call me back within a few hours once he had analyzed all the information. Meanwhile, I went home and called Grace. "Sweetheart, hello, I'm heading home. Do you want me to buy anything?" I asked. "No, thank you, dear. I'll stop by myself. I'm still at practice and will be home in a couple of hours." "Love you," she said, and I reciprocated her feelings. I arrived home and, as usual, started checking the cameras. But alas, there was nothing on them, not even a small hint. However, barely 20 minutes after I got home, Donald called me. "Gregory, sorry to bother you, but right now your wife is cheating on you with Mr. Bauer, who books a room in our hotel at least 3 times a week." I didn't manage to listen further and darted out of the house. Utterly unexpected for me, I just got in my car and drove. I didn't even know what to say or do in such a situation. I was shaking all over. As soon as I arrived at the hotel, I didn't see my wife's car, but Donald approached me. He handed me a photograph and asked, "Is this your wife?" The photo showed Grace walking hand in hand with Peter, whom I recognized instantly. I didn't know his last name, but I recognized him from the photo immediately. This guy had been attending the sessions since they started in an offline format, and I was shocked because he was married. I had talked to him several times, and he had told me about it himself, so I would never have suspected him. Then Donald handed me another piece of paper. We also quickly analyzed their attendance over the last few months and found out that if they stop visiting our hotel now, we will lose $5,000. "You need to pay this, and of course, this price is with a discount." I was in total shock. My wife was cheating on me, and he was talking about money. "I'll pay later, I need to go inside now." No, that's not how things are done. "First the money, then the keys to the room where your wife is frolicking," said that miserable wretch. "If I pay you a part of the sum now and the rest later, would that be acceptable to you?" I asked. "Better to pay the full amount all at once. Why are you not taking my work seriously? And if you pay an extra $3,000 on top, we will include our security service and a videographer, who happens to be our handsome and fragrant administrator," he said. This started to irritate me. It felt like he was deliberately wasting time, so I just told him off and angrily went to the hotel. But at the entrance, I was unexpectedly met by a security guard who told me my entry was denied. I turned around and looked at Donald, who hadn't moved an inch. He looked back at me and tapped his watch with his finger, signaling that I needed to pay up right now. "Here's $2,000 in cash. The rest after." "I'll go to the ATM and withdraw the remaining money," I said, handing him the money. "Deal, but the rate has gone up by $1,500, so you'll need to pay an additional $4,000, he said. "Have you lost your mind? Why the sudden increase?" I asked angrily, unable to contain myself. "Because when I offered you $5,000, I wasn't messing around. And now for the trouble I've been through, you'll need to pay extra," he replied. "Damn," I said. "Fine, I agree. But please, just give me the key and tell me the room number, and I'll be on my way. Here you go. Just make sure you keep it quiet." "No police, Romeo," he said, and I thought to myself what a fool he was. I entered the hotel and quickly found the room I was looking for. Before opening the door, I paused to listen for any sounds, but it was silent. I wanted to catch my wife in the act of cheating, to capture the whole process on camera. I gathered my thoughts, turned on the camera, inserted the key into the lock, and swiftly turned it. I found myself in the room where at that very moment sex was happening on the bed. My wife was in a doggy position, and behind her stood Peter Bauer, both of them naked, with calm romantic music playing in the background. Their content faces quickly turned to confusion. "What the hell are you doing here, Gregory?" Grace asked quickly. "I thought an adult film was being shot here, so I decided to play the role of the cameraman," I said sarcastically, and ended the recording as I had captured the main material. Then I slammed the door shut and locked it. "Well, now we're going to have a threesome," I said, while Grace and her lover were putting on their underwear. Grace got up from the bed and approached me. "Sit down. I'll explain everything to you." At that moment, Peter was putting on his pants and was about to leave the room. Wait, you're leaving already?" "Got scared, or are you going to look for your wedding ring that you accidentally lost somewhere?" He tried to slip past me, but I grabbed him by the hair, turned him towards me, spat in his face, and with a kick, sent him out of the room. He ran down the corridor. Grace was very nervous. She struggled to find the words and even knelt before me. "Darling, I'll explain everything." "Please, sit down," she said, her hands trembling, begging me to sit on a chair. I didn't comply with her request and with a sad expression began to ask her questions. "How long have you been having an affair with him behind my back?" Grace shared that she met Peter online, and he was the first guy who showed interest in her. He insisted that Grace conduct offline sessions. He showed her attention, but Grace put him in his place, stating she had a beloved husband and needed no one else. As soon as I stopped attending the sessions, thinking everything was fine, Peter became more active and started making advances towards Grace with greater enthusiasm. Initially, these were just regular restaurant outings, and Grace justified them to herself as spending time with a friend. However, Peter became more persistent and began requesting private sessions. This went on for about 5 weeks until Peter and Grace ended up in bed together. Grace didn't try to play the victim while telling all this. She fully understood what she was getting into and explained her infidelity by her desire for new emotions and adrenaline. She also mentioned that she knew about the cameras and listening devices, understanding that sooner or later I would catch her in the act of infidelity, and she was just reluctantly waiting for that moment. She saw it as a game. Initially, she met with her lover once a week in a hotel. Then she decided to raise the stakes and started meeting him twice a week. Eventually, she got carried away and could cheat for 5 days straight, knowing I would never find out. She knew I trusted her and wanted to see how far she could go. She also lied to me about her work. I always knew her daily schedule, but there were days she was supposed to have sessions with women which didn't exist. Instead, she spent time with Peter, thrilled by the fact that I was oblivious. For 6 months after being with Peter, she would go to the gym to work out intensely and take a shower there to remove any scent of a man. She wasn't even afraid to leave her phone near me because she knew I would never look through it. She shared several instances where her phone was right in front of me receiving messages from Peter, and I never checked her phone, even though it wasn't locked. She thought everything was perfect and that she and Peter had reached a new level. I left for work that morning. She assumed my wife would stay home all day. But then, Peter was at our house with my wife, having sex with her. He left an hour before I arrived home. Grace had to clean up after them and skillfully pretend that she had been alone all day while she missed me. Every time I took bold decisions for her, the chances of her making a mistake also increased. That's what happened when she forgot to throw away a pack of condoms left under our bed, and then she saw the hidden camera I had installed and realized I was monitoring her. I started to suspect her of cheating. She reduced the number of times she met Peter, but that didn't stop her from making a second mistake. While driving, she mentioned the name of a hotel. Grace also thought that I had installed a navigation system in her car and on her phone, so she always parked her car near the gym and left her phone there when she went to the hotel. She felt elusive. "Yeah," I said sarcastically, and that was exactly what it turned out to be. "I needed to give you a certificate." Grace also mentioned that the sex with Peter was terrible. Now I understood why I had not seen any obvious signs of cheating. We had been doing well in bed, and she had not given me any reason to feel jealous. But at the same time, she was brazenly unfaithful to me right under my nose. I did not know what to say to her. Then, what she said next left me shocked. Grace asked me if I remembered when she was in high school. Everyone bullied her because she was fat, and no one wanted to be her friend. The worst person was Peter Bauer. He even hit her. After they graduated from high school, they did not see each other again for over 8 years. After so much time had passed, Grace realized that Peter had been the guy who bullied her all along and gave her a hard time. However, it was surprising that he did not recognize her. He didn't even remember the girl whom he had bullied at school. Grace felt offended and wanted revenge against Peter. She specifically opened enrollment for classes with men and began flirting with Peter, after which Peter himself started making advances towards Grace. She realized that this was a real opportunity. Peter was the chief director at one of the companies that developed software for personal computer users. Grace also knew that Peter had a wife and 2 children and lived quite comfortably. Grace gained access to Peter's accounts, and he repeatedly shared his company's trade secrets with her. He told her everything and even provided her with a separate bank account into which he deposited money monthly. However, instead of spending it, Grace saved the money over 6 months, accumulating about $300,000. Peter fell head over heels in love with Grace, but he wanted her to continue being his mistress, and she boldly took advantage of this. She realized she had gone too far, but she was afraid to confess everything to me. So, she deliberately left a condom package under the bed and specifically mentioned the name of a hotel, even though she wasn't talking on the phone at that moment. Even the hotel owner, Donald, was involved in this. Donald knew about Grace's plan. I listened to all this and couldn't believe my ears. Grace started with getting a thrill from cheating and ended with it being her plan for revenge against her offender. I didn't know what to believe. Grace was very smart, and I didn't overlook the fact that it could be true, but I needed evidence. But Grace unexpectedly said, "I'll understand if you want to divorce me." After all, there was infidelity, and I acted extremely foolishly. But I want you to know that I love you, and all this is true. She handed me her phone and played a video recording she had made 8 months ago where she talked about her plan and that she didn't want to involve me, she didn't want me to interfere. I was in total shock. My brain was boiling, and I needed time to think it all over. Grace and I went home, and she asked me to give her the opportunity to complete her plan. She wanted to utterly destroy Peter. First, she sent her lawyer to Peter's wife, claiming that her husband was cheating on her with Grace. After that, she wanted Peter to lose his job and sent anonymous letters with the company's secret data presented to her by Peter, demanding his termination or else the information would be released publicly. As a result, Peter's wife filed for divorce, and the company sought to sue Peter for disclosing such confidential information. Ultimately, Peter lost his job and was ordered to pay a fine of $800,000 to avoid criminal charges. He also lost his family, as his wife left him with their children. Moreover, Grace filed a lawsuit against Peter, accusing him of blackmail and coercion into non-consensual intimacy. With the help of expensive lawyers, she won the case, and thanks to Peter, our family budget was replenished by $600,000. This whole affair took 6 months, and Grace and I continued to live together. After this incident, Grace closed the men's club and became gentler and more affectionate. I felt her love for me, and I loved her back. I still couldn't believe what had happened to us, and I decided not to divorce her, but warned her to inform me if she wanted to embark on another adventure. Meanwhile, we bought a new house, upgraded our cars, flew to the Maldives, and are expecting our first child. Everything is going well for us. Story 2. It's raining outside. I'm standing near the door of my wife's lover, who she cheated on me with for 11 years of our marriage. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my family. I had prepared the divorce papers and gathered all the necessary evidence, but when I knocked on the door, I realized this was my biggest mistake. I never considered myself lucky, but by the age of 28, I had achieved good results and owned my own business. My life changed when I met Elizabeth. It was at a charity event that my friends had persuaded me to attend. She was volunteering, and her smile captivated me from the first moment. Do you often attend such events? I asked her, approaching her. The question seemed silly to me, but I was just shy. Yes, I like being here. And you? Her eyes sparkled with interest. Honestly, this is my first time. But now, it seems I'll be appearing here more often, I smiled, and we both laughed. We spent the entire evening talking about everything. It felt so natural and relaxed, as if we had known each other for years. By the end of the evening, I realized I didn't want our conversation to end. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow, I tentatively suggested. I wouldn't mind, she said with a smile. From that evening on, I began to court her, trying to meet with her at every opportunity. I had experience in relationships before, but they all ended disastrously. When it came to marriage, they seemed to vanish at the snap of a finger. But Elizabeth was different. After the day Elizabeth said yes, I knew I had hit the mark. We were busy preparing for the wedding and then building and renovating our home, where my older brother Steve, who was in the military, was a great help. It wasn't just a house, but our nest into which we put all our love and dreams. When our first child was born, I thought there couldn't be a happier person in the world. Elizabeth was a wonderful mother, and I admired her every day. Do you think he looks like me? She asked one day, holding our newborn son in her arms. Without a doubt. He has the same eyes full of curiosity and wonder at the world, I replied, looking at him with incredible tenderness. Then came our second child, our daughter, and our family grew even stronger. I remember painting her room in light tones together, choosing furniture, and decorating her little world. Those moments were filled with such joy that I couldn't imagine living any other way. Life went on, filled with the laughter of our children, family dinners, and warm evenings by the fireplace. I continued to focus on my business and contributed significantly to the family, wanting us to be strong and unbreakable. Elizabeth took on the upbringing of the children while I worked. Sometimes, Elizabeth would leave the children with her parents or mine to attend to her own affairs. She went to fitness classes and also swam in the pool once a week. But over time, I began to notice strange things about my wife. She used to be delighted when I came home, but now her greetings became colder. One evening, when I came home full of news about my day, her reaction was not as before. Imagine, I had to fire such a guy today, I started, but she just glanced at me briefly and continued to scroll through her phone. She distractedly murmured, not looking up. That's great. I tried not to pay attention, telling myself that maybe she was just tired or worried about something. But when these moments began to repeat again and again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Elizabeth, is everything okay? I asked once, trying to look into her eyes. Yes, of course. Just tired, she replied, but her voice sounded distant. It became hard for me. I noticed she spent less time with the children, and the house slowly started to decline. She had always been so active and caring, but now it seemed she didn't care. There were days when I came home to find that dinner wasn't ready and the kitchen was a mess. Once, I even found burnt soup on the stove while she sat enchanted with her phone. This was unlike her. I tried to find out what the problem was, but every attempt to start a conversation ended with her joking it off or saying everything was fine. The decision to hire a detective didn't come to me immediately. Before taking this step, I browsed internet forums and analyzed my wife's behavior. Most signs pointed towards infidelity. I reached out to an old friend who had recently divorced his wife after she had an affair with their neighbor, so I trusted his judgment on this matter. He provided me with the contact details of a private detective, recommending him as a professional in his field. "Are you sure you want to do this, John?" he asked when I sought his advice. He had been through a tough divorce, and when I shared my problem, he only expressed sympathy. "I just want to be sure for my own peace of mind," I replied, realizing I had no other choice. I was working almost every day, so I couldn't afford to keep tabs on my wife myself, and she wasn't sharing anything with me. So, this was the only way out for me. I had tried everything to figure out what the problem was, but Elizabeth wouldn't engage. The meeting with the detective took place in a small cafe. He was a serious and focused man, listening attentively without interrupting. "I understand how difficult this is for you," he said when I had finished. "I will do my best." We discussed the details, and I provided him with all the necessary information, photographs of Elizabeth, her schedule, her phone number. He promised to act discreetly and efficiently. Therefore, I gave him an advance without any reservations. "How soon can I expect news?" I asked as we were parting. "Give me a couple of weeks. I'll contact you as soon as I have something concrete," he replied, and we shook hands. Returning home, my main and perhaps most important task was to avoid arousing suspicion and to maintain a calm lifestyle. The month passed incredibly slowly, with each day dragging on, and I felt like I was gradually losing my mind. Every day, I awaited a call from the detective, and when he finally called, my heart raced in anticipation and fear. "We have something to discuss. Shall we meet at the same cafe?" His voice sounded neutral, but I sensed that the news would be serious. Arriving at the meeting, I saw him sitting at a table with a large folder. His face was focused, and I understood that a difficult conversation awaited. "John, I've gathered enough material to give you a clear picture of the situation," he began, opening the folder. In front of me lay photographs, video recordings, audio recordings, and 5 sheets of text detailing every move my wife had made over the past month. Perhaps the most shocking was a video of my wife having sex, and my worst fears were confirmed. But I hadn't expected that my wife's lover would turn out to be my own older brother, Steve. If we go back in time, Steve was a military man without a family. He spent all his money in bars and on women. He traveled through the states, being transferred from one base to another. The last time I saw him was at our father's birthday 4 years ago, and I had no idea he had returned to our town because no one had informed me. I felt the world around me beginning to crumble. Seeing the evidence of betrayal was unbearable. My heart filled with bitterness and pain. "How long do you think this has been going on?" My voice trembled as I asked. "Based on the evidence, a few months. But in reality, I think a couple of years, if not more. The fact is, they act like experienced lovers. Your wife hasn't left any clues and has been very cautious, which indicates the duration of their relationship. If it's any consolation, judging by your wife's behavior, her meetings with your brother Steve don't seem to bring her any pleasure, and I think there is much more to it than meets the eye," the detective replied. "I'm very sorry." Sitting in that cafe, I tried to gather my thoughts. I didn't know what to do next. Everything seemed pointless. How could I face Elizabeth and look her in the eyes knowing the truth? How could I talk to my brother after such betrayal? What should I do now? I asked the detective, but I understood that I had to find the answer myself. He sighed. "It's up to you, but if I were you, I would discuss everything with your wife. Considering you have all the evidence, you can confront her, and maybe you'll learn something important." I thanked the detective and left the cafe. As soon as I entered the house, Elizabeth sensed something was wrong. Her look was questioning yet showed concern. "Can we talk?" My words came out heavily, and I felt my throat tighten with tension. "Sorry, but I'm busy," she said, though she was just sitting on the sofa looking at her phone. The kids were already asleep. "I don't care." "We need to talk," I said firmly. I pulled out the folder with the evidence and threw it on the coffee table. Her hands trembled slightly as she saw it. "What is this?" Her voice sounded tense. "Evidence of your betrayal." The words came out sharper than I expected. "With my brother, Elizabeth." She paused for a moment, a heavy silence hanging in the room. "John, she began but fell silent, unsure what to say next. Her face quickly changed, guilt evident as if her parents were scolding her for another bad grade at school. "How could you?" My disappointment and anger made my voice quiver. "I trusted you more than anything in the world. We were building a family together. How could you do this behind my back?" Elizabeth lowered her eyes, her hands clenching the edge of the tablecloth. "I didn't know how to tell you. It started so innocently, and then everything spiraled out of control. Innocently? My laugh sounded bitter. Infidelity is never innocent. It happened a few days before our wedding, she began, and I felt my heart tighten even more. I was at a party with the girls. There was a lot of alcohol, and your brother also came to us. He was drinking and flirting with me. He crossed a line. I was completely lost in the moment, and then, literally in an instant, I woke up next to him in some hotel room. I listened intently, trying to comprehend how this could have happened. 11 years ago, it's been a long time. I'm shocked to learn about all this now after so many years. He recorded everything, she managed to say. After the wedding, when you were busy at work, he began to blackmail me. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid it would destroy our family, destroy you. But just a couple of weeks later, he left, and we started to build our life. Steve backed off from me, and I thought it would never happen again. But every year, when he returned from business trips, the first thing he did was come right to me. As long as he was in town for a couple of weeks, I was forced to satisfy his needs. And now, he's returned and has been living in the city for a couple of months, terrorizing me. Elizabeth was struggling to get the words out. She was crying, and I felt sorry for her. Why didn't you tell me right away? I asked, though deep down, I understood the horror she was going through. I was afraid. Afraid of losing you, our family. I thought I could somehow fix this, but I was wrong. It seemed to me that I missed the exact moment when I cheated on you at that party, and I felt that I could never confess this to you. Her voice trembled with tears. The conversation was difficult. Learning the details of betrayal from a loved one was unbearable, yet at the same time, I saw genuine remorse and pain in her eyes. I need some time to process all this, I finally said after she finished. I don't know if we can ever get back what we had, but I promise to think about what we should all do moving forward. She nodded, unable to utter a word. I stood up and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts and guilt. I rushed out of the house, filled not just with anger towards her, but also towards my brother who had played a part in this treacherous game behind my back. I decided I had to confront him face to face to find out why he did this to me, his brother. I found out from Elizabeth where Steve was temporarily staying, so I headed straight there. He was living in a hostel, which I found odd, considering he chose not to stay with our parents. When he opened the door and saw me, his expression instantly changed. "What are you doing here?" His voice was tense. "You owe me an explanation," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "About what you did. Are you drunk or something?" Steve, who was twice my size, said something incredibly foolish. I looked into his dumb face and, unable to hold back, I punched him. It turned out to be a terrible idea because within seconds, I was on the floor with his hefty body on top of me, mercilessly beating my face. He seemed to lose all control and continued to pummel me relentlessly. I don't know how long it lasted, but I lost consciousness a couple of times until a few guys and the hostel administrator, attracted by my screams, pulled Steve off me. I was utterly confused about what was happening. I just lay there, unable to move. Then, an ambulance arrived, and I was taken to the hospital. The doctor informed me that I had suffered a second-degree concussion and needed to stay in the hospital. I had dizziness and severe nausea. My face was swollen, and I had sustained serious injuries. That same evening, the police arrived at the hospital to take my statement. I didn't lie and told them exactly how it happened, that I started the fight, but Steve beat me up, causing complications. I filed a report against Steve, and during the legal proceedings, I had to be under medical observation to assess the severity of my injuries. I also received stitches for a few cuts on my face. Elizabeth came to the hospital that same evening, leaving the children with her parents. She showed clear concern and took care of me, which continued for 3 days until I was discharged from the hospital, and Elizabeth and I went home. I didn't try to bring up the topic of her infidelity because I wasn't up to it. Even 3 days later, I continued to feel nauseous, and now I was plagued by headaches. I didn't expect my meeting with my brother to end this way, but time can't be turned back. If I had known he was such a monster, I wouldn't have gone to him. But on the other hand, I had good reasons to confront him. As soon as Elizabeth and I arrived home, I went into the living room and wanted to get the divorce papers from the cabinet. But when I opened it, I couldn't find them. I turned and looked at Elizabeth. "Where are the documents?" I asked, and she just shook her head, indicating she didn't know what documents I was talking about. "We need to talk," I began as we sat opposite each other. Her look was filled with anxiety, but at the same time, it bore hope. "I understand. You found the divorce documents and hid them, and now you're trying to convince me that you have no idea about them," I said, my voice tinged with weariness. "I appreciate you taking care of me while I was in the hospital, but understand, how can I trust you going forward if you continue to deceive me over such trifles, Elizabeth?" She tried to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I've made a decision," my voice sounded tired but firm. "I can't continue living this way. Too much has changed between us, and I can't forgive the infidelity. It seems better for both of us to get a divorce." Elizabeth turned pale, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I knew it," she whispered. "I was so afraid of this, but I understand you. I apologize for everything I've done. I never wanted to hurt you." We both sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbed in our thoughts and feelings. It was hard to realize that our marriage, built on love and trust, was ending this way. I was angry at myself for not seeing the monster in my brother, though he always wanted to appear kind and friendly. "I'm glad you understand me," I continued after a while. "But it will be hard for me to live under the same roof with you after everything I've learned. I realize you wanted to portray yourself as the victim, but nothing was stopping you from talking to me. My feelings for you are gone. I feel nothing for you anymore. I'm sorry if this sounds hurtful and painful. I never wanted it to happen." Elizabeth cried and returned to me my divorce papers, which she had signed voluntarily. I didn't want to ruin Elizabeth's life because I knew she would have to raise 2 children. I would help out with money and time, but now I won't always be there. I moved into a hotel for a while and lived there. I hired a lawyer to sue Steve. I wanted to punish him. I visited a doctor every week, and he checked on my health, but not everything was fine after being beaten by Steve. My vision worsened, forcing me to buy lenses, and I also experienced increased intracranial and arterial pressure, causing constant headaches and fatigue. It became difficult for me to concentrate on anything, and sometimes when I was driving, I would feel nauseous. All this was recorded in my medical book, and soon these documents were presented in court as evidence. The trial was scheduled 2 months after the incident, and with my lawyer's help, we managed to have Steve kept in custody during this time because I was genuinely afraid of him. Steve complained to my parents that I wanted to imprison my own brother, but I didn't care about my parents' opinion. I was afraid to tell them what really happened, so I kept delaying that moment. During the trial, my lawyer provided evidence that my health had significantly deteriorated after the beating. My face was still hurting and slightly swollen even 2 months later. Surveillance camera footage was also presented in court, where I saw for the first time that Steve had been hitting me continuously for 3 minutes without stopping. It was a lot. He behaved like an unbalanced person. His situation was worsened by the fact that he was also a military man with a good rank. Such behavior is unacceptable for military personnel. As a result, Steve had to pay me substantial compensation, pay a fine, and spend 2 years in prison. After the trial against Steve, the divorce proceedings followed. We both decided to divorce by mutual consent. I left her the house and her car, and the children stayed with her. We agreed that I would visit our children every week and pay child support. I had doubts about whether the children were mine, so I insisted on doing a DNA test to verify if I was their biological father. It turned out I was, which was a relief in a way. I bought myself a small apartment to start with and continued with my business. My parents refused to talk to me because their son, that is, my brother, was in prison, but I didn't feel guilty about it. However, 4 months after Steve was imprisoned, my parents persuaded me to visit him just for a talk. I decided to make this concession to mend things with my parents. We met with Steve in the common room where there were large metal tables for talks with prisoners, and the chairs were welded to the floor. Steve sat opposite me, and we silently looked at each other for a few minutes. "You destroyed my family," I managed to say, trying to catch my breath. He didn't respond, he just looked at me with regret and shame. I hoped he would try to explain something to me, and I wanted to get him to talk. I started reminiscing about our childhood, how good we had it together, how we played, and how distance grew between us over time. Steve listened attentively, showing he cared about our relationship. Eventually, I got him to say his first words. "Forgive me, brother," and after that, Steve confessed that it was because of him that girls left me when things got serious towards marriage. He deliberately slept with my women and then blackmailed them because he didn't want me to have a happy life. He was jealous that I managed to build my own business and that I was always surrounded by many women. He told me about how he blackmailed Elizabeth and how she almost wanted to end her life, but he talked her out of it, portraying himself as a hero. I couldn't stand it and spat in his face, saying, "If you're jealous, envy in silence, bastard."